Hey, it is Alicia, and welcome back to the Enemy Podcast. Yeah, I am so excited because I have Clarissa Fuselier here on the podcast. I said it right, right?
Yeah, you did.
Praise the Lord. Listen, we were going back and forth, not back and forth, like it was no battle, but it was making sure I was saying things right because y'all know how I roll. But I am so excited to be here with Clarissa today as we continue talking about this whole idea around liberation. She answered the call, and I am so excited that you did. So thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Welcome to the Enemy Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to dig in.
Awesome, awesome. So, Clarissa, if you don't mind, I what I've been doing is I've been just kind of talking to people just in general around this whole idea around liberation and what that means to them. But even before we kind of like really go into that, what how am I gonna say this?
Mhm.
Like, what made you decide to say, okay, yeah, I want to talk to her about this particular topic?
I got you. I got you. Yeah. So, I think what will help shine a little light is to talk about what I work on. And
Mm,
so I do a lot of equity and inclusion work in
mm,
organizations where DEI is heavily politicized right now. We know
yes.
for myriads of reasons, but the goal of it is about making things fair for those in the workplace, and that being anyone who is their identities is aligned to what we would say on the margins of society,
Hmm.
meaning those people who associate with that identity and are seen as typically less valuable, less worthy, less seen as getting the resources and support that they need. So whether that's racial, with when the Black and Brown community, queerness, disability, all those identities make up who we are, and it's you can't talk about DEI or things like equity and things about including people without having discussions around liberation and
Mm,
what liberation looks like, in different contexts of our lives, and also generally for like Black liberation, what does that look like? So in knowing how a lot of this spins around and all are interconnected to things that we do in our work and in our personal lives, when you had reached out and said you were looking for folks, I think I have a very interesting lens to share about my perspective of what liberation really looks like, and the things that I've learned along the way in working with different marginalized communities and listening to them and understanding like where all of our needs are interconnected for liberation.
yeah. And it's I love the fact it's so wild. Like you're the second person that I've talked to that works in the DEI world, right?
Mhm.
And the last person I was talking to that actually has this same type that does the same type of work. We were talking about. I was saying that in my workspace, because I work in a school, DEI is like it's a big thing, and so we have a coordinator who's like the DEI coordinator. I'm at our school, and like I said, I could be saying this person's title completely wrong. So, I'm just apologizing in advance because I know everyone's, depending on where you are, it's still DEI work, but the title could be different. But
Yes.
you know my heart. You know what I'm saying? But all that to say, what I was sharing with them, and I'll share with you as well, is that this whole world around DEI, sometimes it can be really tough for Black and Brown people in those spaces because a lot of the information that's being shared can be triggering, even though it's educational for some people who have no idea like what this work looks like. But in terms of that, I wanted to kind of see your take on that. With in terms of like the triggering components of the DEI training for Black and Brown people, what do you find is helpful for those that are in those positions that do feel triggered from whatever information shared during those particular sessions?
That's a really good question. And so, I look at this. So there's a couple of things that people need to be mindful of when we're talking about DEI being seen through a lens of those who are running it who happen to be Black and brown, right? That
Mhm.
we are taking on a massive amount of emotional labor,
Yeah.
because there is no way that I can talk about the history of America in many different facets, where you're looking at it from an educational lens, through a healthcare lens, through any of our institutions, right?
Right.
We're going to find trauma there that directly ties to me as a Black woman in that space. Like, you can't even talk too long without, the healthcare system and even gynecology, to realize that the fathers of gynecology used enslaved Black women to do these surgeries and experimentations on without anesthesia, you
Right.
know. So I think what it takes, and what doesn't get talked about a whole lot, is what we call trauma informed care, when
Mm.
it comes to speaking about these things in spaces for those of us who are likely to be triggered by unpacking that trauma around other people. Because one, we tend to forget that, when we put everyone in these spaces to get educated, we have to ask ourselves, okay, who needs to get the message, and who's actually going to be affected adversely to this message?
Mhm.
And the thing is about this, Alicia, is people always tend to have the wrong answers to that, because
Mm.
what you tend to see is, when they ask that question, they're like, well, the non-melanated and white counterparts are probably going to be uncomfortable, so
Right.
let's make the space for their comfort. And I am in opposition to that, because
Yeah.
that is not the ones who are going to be adversely affected. It is us in those spaces that are going to
Yeah.
be more adversely affected. So there's some work that needs to happen in DEI too, when coming from it from a perspective of who deserves, like we said, when Bob Margins, it really talks about who's deserving of care, who's deserving of support, who's deserving of giving the benefit of doubt. All these like privileges and leeways and graces that we give people, we have to always think about that, even in when spaces where you're practicing DEI and more group sentiments, is we need to make sure that we're protecting the people who we know are going to get triggered by this, and understanding what they need. And maybe some of those workshops, we have learned too, don't necessarily need Black and brown people being involved.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think in the corporate spaces, there's a little resistance to that, which I'm not quite understanding. Part of
Mhm.
it could be because they felt like then you would be in singling out everyone except Black and brown. But I was like, well, that's not a problem if they're not the audience, you
Right.
know.
Wow. And it's so wild. Like, just even thinking about, like, past DEI workshops I've gone to, and seeing the facilitators, the majority of them, I mean, now that you're saying that, they've all been Black and brown people for the most part. Um, and is it a thing of, like, where, like, white counterparts just don't see that, not that they don't see, but that they don't feel like this space is, or this type of information is something they could actually teach? Or, I don't know, right?
Yeah, well, so there's in the DEI space, one is to give people a little bit of background. So diversity, equity, inclusion as a practice really stemmed from the civil rights movement. So
Okay.
shortly after the Civil Rights Act was ratified and codified, then there was a sentiment of like, okay, so how do we actually enact this in the workplace and in our institutions? And
Mhm.
this started in the universities first, which is why you're seeing this backlash of universities, getting treated poorly or having some issues where they're trying to remove DEI from universities' grasp, right? But that's where it started, and it really was very black and brown centered. That's one thing that we say is that things like the racial equity has to be the foundation of everything DEI
Mm,
because that's its origin. Its
right.
origin stemmed from that of making sure that things were fair in racial equity throughout different organizations. So now that we know where it stemmed from, then you have to ask yourself who is more prepared and has the range, so to speak, to be
Mm,
able to speak on these topics learned long term. And so you're going to find different people in the DEI space that have different opinions. But in the 7 years that I've been doing this work, it is a combination of lived experience and fundamental understanding around um, historical disparities, employment laws, things around justice. Like, so it's a combination of both. So when you do have, it's very common that you will see Black and brown folks lead these conversations
right.
because it's the lived experience that gives us that lens that's that sees a little bit further than someone who just has like fundamental education around DEI.
Right. Right.
So it's not to say that those who are not Black don't have any or aren't able to learn things around racial equity and how DEI is practiced. But what it is, it means that those individuals need extra work and training.
Mm,
And also there's going to be a part of an area where there's no way that they can really understand. Like their lived experience is going to be a lot shorter because there's no way you can understand being a Black woman in
right.
America,
Right.
also having to orchestrate how things really look. So I think you're going to see that because it's it's a very nuanced piece of education that we're
Mhm,
doing in that you need to be able to hold multiple realities in your mind at the same time.
mm,
And the less privy you are to having that lived experience about the racial disparities and divide, and knowing that racial equity is a foundation to DEI, then you're going to be at a deficit, you
yeah.
know?
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering that because, well, one, because like I said, I've been in several, like different places I've worked at. They would bring in different companies that center around DEI work, and when we'd have those opportunities to like sit and talk with people, and I'm just in general, I'm just thinking like, where are the people that aren't black and brown in these spaces? But the way you broke it down, it makes more sense to me because it's like, yeah, if you don't understand this beyond what you've been taught, it's almost generic in a way,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we see sometimes in this space, unfortunately, is that we have, and I give a lot of grace because this space, even though it's been around for decades, it
Mhm.
hasn't blew up the way it has before until now into where it's in the mainstream. So you have a lot of people who have been in it for 20 plus years, and then you have people who had just got into it after what happened with George Floyd. After
Right.
George Floyd was murdered, then there was a onslaught of lots of new people getting into the diversity, equity, inclusion space. However, not everybody learns the same way. Not
Yeah.
everybody was trained the same way. And we don't have any kind of centralized trade organization or like union or anything where the practice and like guiding principles of doing this work is centralized, where most of us who are doing this work are aligned on those practices, right?
Mm,
So that's why it's important to, when we're talking about liberation, is that you want practitioners to get involved in your organization who has been decolonizing themselves. And what I mean by that is to start looking at how, what we call white supremacy culture has seeped in to everything we do. And those like behaviors of white supremacy culture is believing the written word above everything else,
Mm,
which is harmful to a lot of Black and Indigenous folks because there's tons of information that has been passed down from us just by ear and just
right.
by learning and listening. But those things are not invalidated just because they weren't written down. The other thing is right to comfort. So that's what we have to worry about too in these diversity, equity, inclusion spaces is that um, you're like you feeling that you don't want to be in this discussion that's talking about race because it makes you uncomfortable, pitching to have something that's a little bit lighter and don't want to have that discussion. That's a culture that we all kind of got used to is we don't want to do the hard things. We don't want to do the
Yeah.
hard conversations. I just want to be able to deflect from that. So those type of behaviors keep us from decolonizing our spaces where people actually do feel comfortable bringing their whole selves and being able to have honest, respectful conversations because we have these different uh pseudo cultures, like even professionalism, right? When we throw around the word professionalism, when you start having people like define what that is, it's things that are inherently anti-black and can also anti-queer. Like, I don't
Right.
want to see anyone with too many tattoos, or I don't want to see people with head wraps and having their natural hair that's curly that comes out of their head. All
Right.
those things are under these big weird blankets of pseudo culture like professionalism, but they hold up ways that prevent us from being fully liberated.
It's so funny that you brought that up and just that whole authentic, like bringing your authentic self to work or whatever space that you're in, whether it be the educational setting or whatever. Because I was sharing with someone else about so at the school I worked at, we the faculty and staff create not created we completed. I can't even talk today. What's happening? We completed this survey. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called the Flair survey.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we actually did the Flair survey, and our DEI coordinator shared with us the section that basically just focuses on the racism piece.
Hmm.
And she shared that out of so I think it's a scale of 0 to 10, or maybe it's 1 to 10. I don't know. But the point of it is 10 is the highest that you can get as a collective. And in terms of Black and brown people feeling like they could be their authentic self at work, I think we scored like a 2.8.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I was like, I mean, I answered the way I answered, and clearly I felt similarly, but I didn't realize so many people in that space felt that way too. And I work,
Mhm.
and where we work, it's a pretty diverse place. But like you said, that decolonization of these workspaces is crucial because even though you have a diverse group of people, that mentality and mindset is still there, you know?
Still hovering over you. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
You
why
know.
I mean, I was blown away. I could not believe it. But at the same time, it's like it makes sense because this is what we've been brought up in, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Like, I personally feel that things like professionalism and respectability politics really go hand in hand.
Mm,
And when we talk about, say, and thinking of it through the lens of liberation, right? Like, respectability politics. I grew up in a predominantly Black town. I had the privilege of educators from the time I stepped in school to the time that I got my little lambskin, that I had Black faces that were educating me and looked like me, right?
mhm,
That whole thing changed when I went to college and I went to a predominantly white institution. But, with that, there's a history of how our modern ancestors were trying to fight for liberation. And one of the practices that they really came through with, and for people like W.E.B. Du Bois, was talking about how, like, Black excellence,
mm,
and that if we continue to show our excellence be just as professional as them, be just as clean as
Mm,
them, just as be respectable as them, then they are going to give us the freedom and be able to release us, and we'll be able to be seen as equals and human beings. And now I think our ancestors were coming from a good place,
right,
and that's where they kind of started. But as we have grown as a people, and we have been doing decades upon decades upon decades of Black excellence, we're not seeing that needle move as far as I think our ancestors would like to have hoped, right?
right,
And so, respectability politics, whether you'll see it in any marginalized community where it feels like we know that we're on the margins. If we try to assimilate like the dominant culture, then maybe then they will see us as human beings and give us the same respect and freedoms as knowledge as everybody else. But that ain't working.
right.
So we know now that respectability politics doesn't do anything but make the dominant cultures feel comfortable and safe around us.
Yes. Wow. That is like literally that was it right there because I feel like now in my life at 45 I'm like I am worn out with
Yeah.
trying to assimilate, trying to like you said, like our ancestors were coming from a good place, but they're like if we do the things, if we check off all the boxes that they placed,
Hmm.
on whatever, description of being, a respectable human being, then they'll see that we really are human and that we can belong like anyone else, and it's like no, that's not really it.
No, no. And if we look back at that, and this is where a lot of healing for us that we are here now has to begin, because especially for Black women, we have worn so we had capes almost from the time that we could walk. We were
Hmm.
expected to be, we all talk about like the Black tax. My mother had taught me about that when I was growing up, just knowing like
Right.
one, you always have to be clean. They always talk about when I used to go into the office how like, "Ooh, you all gussied up." I'm like, I was raised to believe that I had to dress to the nines for professional work every
Hmm.
day, hair done every day, looking presentable, having work on top of work you haven't even asked for yet.
Right.
I'm already producing. But, this is also why I do coaching, especially for Black women, because we are killing ourselves doing this.
Yes.
We are hurting ourselves. If anyone can look back at what happened with Dr. Claudine Gay at Harvard, Dr. Candace,
Right.
Dr. Bonnie, um, and especially in institutions like education and higher education, that huge umbrella of professionalism beats down
Yes.
Black professional women on the regular. And I know that we have to be able to pull ourselves away from that so we can heal ourselves, because the whole thing about Black excellence, like I said, has been a lie, because we've been doing excellence from the
Yeah.
time we were liberated, Alicia.
Yeah.
Like when like there was no holding pattern for us when our ancestors were finally realized that they were free. They were like, go. They were already on it. They were, joining, they were getting elected, they were running for positions, they were opening schools. We
Right.
were doing all these things from the get-go,
Right.
right? So now we have to ask ourselves, okay, so if we've been doing it for this long, not, skipping a beat throughout all the, obstacles of oppression that has been transforming as we transformed,
Hmm.
right? As we moved on from how we were going to be free from enslavement, then came Jim Crow to make us less free-ish,
Right.
right? And so these things will continue to evolve. And so what we have to break away from when we talk about liberation is looking back at those things that, we've tried and then realize, sorry, my dog's agreeing with me.
Listen.
Uh,
They're like, say that, say that.
uh, so, we were talking about that, and sorry, I lost my place for a second.
You're fine. No, go for it. No, you're
Okay.
good.
Okay. So when I'm saying that we need to take a step back from that is now that that doesn't serve us anymore. And like, I don't want people to get lost in it. Like, don't think when we say, oh, I don't believe in Black excellence, doesn't mean that we're not going to keep being exceptional, because that's just what we do.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
not going away. What
Right.
we're saying is you don't have to kill yourself for that anymore.
Mm,
It's not worth it.
right.
It's not worth it. You are worthy to protect your peace. And this is also part of liberation and resistance. Even Audre Lorde said that, like, resting is resistance.
Yes.
Being able to stop and say, you know what? I'm going to let somebody else take care of that. That
Yeah.
does not mean that I am not worthy, that I'm
Mm,
not worthy to be excellent, and that I'm not excelling. I just also value myself enough to say that I deserve my peace.
yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that and just saying that in that way. Because as you were saying that, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is hitting me so hard because I am, and I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here right now, but I am the queen of doing the most. You know what I'm saying? Like I have to do all these things,
Yeah.
ha- you know, even to the point where I'm staying at work later because I want to prove. It's like, but why am like, what am I proving?
Yeah.
Like, what am I proving? Like, I am enough as me, right?
Mhm.
That this is enough. Even down to me getting all these degrees. I have 20 million degrees, and it was like, what am I proving? Like, I am enough. You
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
when it comes right
Yes.
down to it, I am enough. Like, even if I didn't have any of these degrees, I am still
Yes.
enough. But
Enough.
unfortunately, the way I was conditioned to think was that you have to be 20 steps ahead. You have to be, 100 times better, whatever that looks like. And that's no fault of my mother, and just the elders in my family.
Mhm.
That's what they thought was,
Best.
what
Yeah.
would, keep me in a place of excellence,
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think now a lot of us are just, like you said, we are tired, we're exhausted, and it's just like we deserve to rest.
Yeah. And this is like this, this discussion is finally funneling down to what I want people to look at liberation from a different lens. Like,
Mm,
this is part of liberation work for yourself.
yeah.
You have to be able to put on the mask first before you can liberate others. And that's a
Okay.
gift, right? Once you learn to, accept yourself as you are without all this, like, we're here. The true part of who we are is right here.
Right.
But we have all of this, of what society expects of us, what our ancestors expect to us, what
Mhm.
the world, what our moms, what our aunties, what our ex-boss asking of us. All this is on our true selves, on our necks. And once we start burrowing out of that, we are going to find a level of appreciation for ourselves and a liberation that we have not discovered before. It's
Mm,
because it's buried all under all of this mess, all of
right.
these things that are going to continue to push the goalposts. No matter how excellent you are, it's going to be like, all right, well, then, like this. And then you
Yeah.
need to still do this. And you need to do X. And when you start to, like, unpack all of that and realize, so there's an analogy that I tell some of my clients when they say, like, "Oh, I made this mistake or something," or like, "Oh, I didn't finish my degree. I feel, worthless." And I was like, "Okay, so if you find a $5 bill on the ground, let's say you're walking from the store, you find a $5 bill on the ground. It's in the mud, it's in the muck. Um, how much is that $5 still worth?" And just like, $5,
Yeah.
still worth $5, right? That value, your value does not depreciate over time. It
Mm,
does not depreciate when you make a mistake. It does not depreciate when you fall short on one of your goals. You you are working within systems that were not designed for you to succeed.
Yeah.
So why are you depreciating your value when those systems are eager to depreciate your value, no matter if that bill fresh came out of the print?
Yeah. Wow. That is so true because it's like you're constantly just fighting again and just going against the grain constantly. It's just like, when am I going to basically just be liberated from whatever and people see who I see my worth? It's like, no, I need to know my worth,
Yeah, it
and
starts with
stand in
that.
that. What were you
and
saying? I'm
and
sorry.
letting and letting a lot of that go, right? Like I said,
Yeah.
like our ancestors gave us tools and they gave us pearls because their goal was to try to help us succeed. And where is no harm in us looking back as adults, and realizing, okay, so that is what they wanted to do. I want to be able to reach that goal, but the way that I reach that goal is going to be different than the input that they gave me. I'm going to
Yeah.
try this other thing here. And I'm still going to be respecting my goals, our generational goals for liberation, because I'm doing it the way that I feel that feels right for me, that feels
Yeah.
safe for me, and let that stuff go.
Yeah. I love that. I want to shift though, because you said something and I was like, wait a minute. Okay, I got to hear about this. So you coach women?
Yeah, yeah. So they all seem to come together. So at one point, before the pandemic, I wanted to understand what being a life coach was,
Hmm.
and started, taking my studies and getting my certification on that. And I was really intrigued about it. I really wanted to do it. But I was still working a full time at tech, and then the pandemic hit, and then there were a lot of people who were reaching out needing some support, like, because you had people who had to sit still for a moment, and that was another piece of liberation, right? Like,
Yeah.
this society that we're in forces us to have to work and be on the grind all the time. It's
Yeah.
hard for you to think about yourself and what you want and what your goals are if you're in survival mode 24/7. What
Yeah.
the pandemic did, in a strange way, it made a lot of people be forced to stop for a minute and have to sit with themselves, and then also come to some realizations of what really matters to them. Like, some people were sitting at home and realizing, I want to be able to spend time with my family more
Yeah.
instead of, doing a whole lot of commuting to this job that doesn't care about me. Or I want to be able to pivot into another career. I want to be able to take the time for me to be able to do those things. And it's like, once people started like looking for that, then they needed support. So I started going into it. And then, because I also do DEI work, I saw where those things intersected really clearly, because when I go in for DEI, I'm looking at organizational change.
Mm.
But I also know that systems are made out of people. So
Right.
when we say we want to be hard on systems, soft on people, me being soft on people, that's where my coaching comes in.
Okay.
So if there are people who are trying to unpack, especially Black women who are trying to unpack, where am I now? Where do I want to go next? Being able to build up their self love, their self esteem, their confidence, and being able to be healthy within these harmful systems that surround us all the time. Like, we need that kind of support. And I think, learning from my mother, it's always been about community, and healing is a community effort.
Yeah.
And that sometimes you need somebody in your corner to be your cheerleader, or to help you see around corners, or to even just sit with you when you're not feeling all that great about something, and want to be able to have somebody to help you nudge you forward. Like, I think that's what I like to be able to give back into the community. And now I'm seeing a whole lot of Gen Z, Black women being little budding activists, and they need that support too. And I know how that lens and that nuance of having to have those multiple realities, being able to having to absorb a lot of emotional labor while you're trying to be a change agent. You need a lot of mental support. You need a support team to help you with that. And so I like being a part of that, because I want them to be able to have the skill set so they have the endurance and the stamina needed to keep going, because it could be very easy for you to fall in despair, to get frustrated, to get
Right.
angry. A lot of times we as Black women, we turn it on ourselves. I must not be doing enough, you know,
Yes.
trying to make that cape even bigger than it already is. And
Yes.
I like to be coming in and be like, okay, sis, let's take a breather.
Mm.
Let's like recap of the things that you've already doing,
Mm.
and taking time to appreciate yourself and with the work you're doing. Okay. All right. Well, then, when's the last time that you took care of yourself? When's the last time you discovered things about yourself that you like or don't like? When was the last time you've practiced setting boundaries so people don't run all over you and force you to overcommit things? I'm trying to get y'all to loosen up that cape. And some of y'all might need to burn it. And I don't have any judgment on that at all.
Right.
My job is to like help you find, go on in your life journey where you still feel healthy and appreciated and love yourself, and continue forward with that.
I love that. That is so beautiful. I love that type of work because it's like sometimes you feel, and I speak for myself. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but sometimes I feel like as a Black woman, I have to take on all these things because it's just like a generational type of like passing the
Yeah.
torch. And it's like
Mhm.
I got to handle it all because who else is going to do it? And it's like no, there are other people out there, Alicia. There's community. You just have to
Yeah.
either create it or or join a community and know that that support is there. Um, but I
Yeah.
wanted to add. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was co-signing like, yes.
Yeah, no, but I wanted to ask you though, as it relates to like the Gen Z individuals, do you find that they have that same type of mentality where they feel like they have to kind of like take on the tasks like we did in the past, or are they more liberated in how they approach, boundaries and how they're taking care of themselves as opposed to us just, burning at both ends?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because yeah, um it's more of the latter.
Hmm.
I think the work that we did as Gen Xers and millennials, even the ones who are in between, like me, I'm a zennial.
Okay.
Uh, was right in that sweet spot before things were like completely digital, but still analog, right?
Mhm.
They've learned a lot from us about mental health,
Yes.
and that it's important to focus on that. And they are really good about trying to hold that a kind of boundary around that.
Hmm.
However, I think they still have not found the right um, combination of maintaining boundaries.
Okay.
So, what they might do is say, hey, I'm not going to, spend all day, doing this work, but they might stand their ground that day, but then a week later, okay, sure. Like, why not? Because I don't, because they also too like I don't want to hurt any feelings, and I think a lot of that kind of comes from. I know when we talk about different generations, people generalize a lot, and like it's never really done anybody any good. So what I will say is like patterns that I see that are
Hmm.
really just not necessarily unique to Gen Z when I'm working with them, but I think it's learning how to get comfortable in physical spaces and communicating
Hmm.
openly, and how you can learn how to read the room and
Yeah.
just focus on asking more questions instead of, using maybe one or two people as kind of like a litmus of like how the whole group that you're talking to.
Right.
So I think there's some work that I do with some of them there on getting comfortable in their own skin, talking to people, and being able to learn how to leave space for them to just actively listen
Hmm.
before you start forming your opinion or idea. Like, think about how you can learn about that person so you can craft a better bridge between them.
Yeah.
is where I'm starting to see.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm also wondering if some of that too is lived experience. Like the more that you experience and live, the more that you can say, "Oh, okay, there's more to this than what."
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Like I'm wondering.
Yeah, and a lot of that really is too, like, learning how to get out of your comfort zone. Like, if you
Mhm.
find yourself, and this is really hard for, like, and important for the work that I do, is, like, if you are in the same spaces with the same people that everyone's always agreeing with you, you're in the wrong space.
Right.
You need to be able to learn and understand that when I talk about community, I talk about people like you're all threaded together by some common values, but how you actually execute on those values do not have to be the same. Y'all
Right.
will always agree on everything, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not a community. A community is people that believes that I'm going to show up for you because I know that you'll show up for me if you could.
Mm.
And we are tied together by these values of liberation. And so my things are, when you're trying to build a community, you want to bring everybody in with it. So it's not having someone, bring down rules from the top of like, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to behave. Community is about collective input. And so I think that's the part that, when it comes to like the liberation work that like
Yeah.
some of the Gen Zers are working with, and the people that I like are starting to get involved as change agents, is that you have to stop following, try not to try to find somebody, the right person that you can blindly follow.
Mm. Yes.
I think we have, and I wouldn't even put that just on like Gen Z. I would put this on us collectively, because the social media, part of our lives, because it is part of our lives whether we like it or not, really has this drive of like, I want you to find some kind of idol, of someone who is like this outward pinnacle of your values, so I could just blindly follow whatever they say and do. And I think that's very lazy of us. And I get that a lot
Mm.
of us are tired,
Yeah.
but it's so important for us to be very nuanced in understanding that multiple truths exist at the same time in this world. There's
Right.
no binary thinking. There's no this and that or that. There's this and that, and
And
maybe
right.
that over there these days, right?
Yeah. No, that like you hit it like round the head. And I feel like now with everything that's just happening in the world, particularly like things that are going on, like with the things in Palestine and all this, and like how people are calling out celebrities that they looked up to that was kind of like their idol, and like it's like a fall from grace in a way. And it's
Mhm.
like this person, even though they are a star or a singer or whatever, whatever their fame, their gifts have, provided fame around, they're still a person. And it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, you can't completely like go in blind thinking, okay, of course, because I like this person and
yeah,
everything I've seen them, present so far looks like it aligns with me. Now that this one thing has happened, now they're not on my side. What am I gonna do? My whole world is shut. It's like,
yeah, yeah. Like the parasocial relationships has been kicking our butts, like just kicking our butts all over the place. Because
right.
yeah, you'll see that, and then I have to step back and ask people like, why? At what point did you pin all of your values onto this person who
Hmm.
does not even know you? And then
Right.
when it turns out that they don't necessarily embody all of your values, now you're heartbroken. But
Mhm.
my thing was that, why did you put faith in an individual that,
Mm.
instead of putting that kind of faith in yourself of like, I want to spend my energy focusing on the values that I support and how do I embody those values every single day. You're
Right.
expecting somebody who probably has an intern helping with their like social media texts and stuff, like they're very far removed, and that's
Right.
why I say too, like when I talk to the my clients and people that are saying, how do I get involved? And it's like, plug in locally.
Yeah.
Please plug in locally. Because I get more out of making connections with people where I work, where I live, where I shop, who get me. And those are the type of people that you want to build relationships with, and that you will respect because they share your values, but you're less likely to hopefully put that person on some weird pedestal,
Yeah.
based on those things, because you know that they're human. Somehow I think when it comes to celebrities and public figures, like, we put them up here and somehow they can do no wrong, but we just
Right.
forget, when you do that, you dehumanize a person, because
Yeah.
of course they're going to be able to do wrong. We don't know what they do 24/7. They put social media messages of what we want to hear. We don't know what they do in 24 hours out of the day.
Right. And I think that is like the perfect way of saying it. It's like I don't even know what people in my family do 20. You know what I'm saying? Like people that I
Yeah.
am constantly around. So why would you think that someone that's of celebrity status, like that you would have like all the ins and outs of who they are? Like no, like that's just unrealistic. And it's like we're putting ourselves in a way of like just I don't want to say like bondage, but it's kind of like a sense of bondage because it's like you're not even freeing yourself from the idea of like, okay, I enjoy this person as an artist,
Yeah.
and I appreciate whatever, but like to completely put all of your hopes and dreams in this, it's going to really bite you in the butt later, in my opinion. I feel like
Well,
that.
Well, yeah, and then we see now, like with this culture, and the culture of parasocial relationships have always kind of been around, but definitely around the pandemic where everybody was in lockdown, people were grabbing onto any kind of connection that they
Yeah.
could. And of course, celebrities are going to do what celebrities do, and they're going to take an opportunity to like post their content and show their face and interact with people, because, you know, celebrities and stuff have brands. When
Yes.
you when people are working on a brand, that is an outward image that they're presenting to you.
Right.
So with that said, you have to be able to take that with a grain of salt and what face value is. They're
Right.
entertainers, and they're not perfect.
Right.
They might not even know what's going on. Well, when was the last time they probably read news around like Israel and Palestine, right?
Right.
So you holding a candle or a torch for that person is really dangerous for you and
Yeah.
disappointing, right?
Right.
I would
Right.
rather you spend that energy making connections with people who are doing mutual aid in your community, who's trying
Right.
to make sure that they're solving food insecurity and housing insecurity,
Yes.
and like knowing how to like how things are going on in your local legislation. So, you can show up to those city council meetings,
Right.
you can make those connections, but making a connection with like, Ariana Grande, like, it's only going to go so far.
Right. Right. So and
She will
it's so
probably not show up with you to the city council meeting, just saying.
pretty sure she won't.
She might pencil you in.
Right. 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 I wanted to circle back because we were talking about, or you were talking about rather, the origins of DEI work started on the university level, right?
Mhm.
And what we're seeing now, how things are being basically, ripped apart in these spaces as it relates to DEI. Um, how can those that are looking to continue this type of work in those spaces and even in workspaces, how can they continue to keep this work alive? Because I mean, to know that this can be completely erased from someone's experience in their educational setting or even just their workplace, it could really be detrimental to how they experience that particular environment. So how do we keep this going?
Yeah, yeah. So I think so. A lot of people have different think pieces that have been going on about this. You have some organizations who are saying that they are going to be calling DEI by another name. The work they do is going to be called differently and not
Okay.
necessarily DEI. And then you have some folks who are still going to just continue to do what they can within like the laws of the land, right? Like I'm here in Texas, and Texas wrote out a law starting last month, that no university could fund any DEI initiatives and programs. Like
Wow.
they're cut. So my thing is, we I was waiting for this because we can look throughout history, and this is like no big brainer, but for every revolution there will be a counter revolution.
Mm,
Anytime that you actually make moves on pushing forward, you're going to have that greater resistance trying to push back. And
yeah.
that is what we're seeing. So
Yeah.
when I tell folks, when some folks are feeling very discouraged about it, it's definitely worth feeling discouraged. I will say this, that silver lining does show that because we have such a massive pushback means we were doing something right.
Yes. Yeah.
We were doing something right. And this is a result of it. It's the fear of, now we have people, black and brown folks, those who had been ignored forever and a day, are now being listened to. They're
Mm,
being put in positions of power. They're actually making things better, not for those that just look like them, but for everyone. And that's the difference between liberation and supremacy.
yeah.
When you are in it to liberate everyone, not just people who look and sound like you, that's liberation. If
Yeah.
you're only in it to liberate yourself and those that, look and feel like you, that's supremacy.
Yeah.
That's saying that my people is worthy than everyone else. But if you're doing it to say, I'm going to make sure I fix it for those who are the most vulnerable, so it's going to work for everyone who's vulnerable.
Right.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
And so I guess to button that up, my thing is, um, you have to keep pushing, and you just have to get creative, because what I will say is how the origin of DEI got started in the universities. They started out as whisper networks.
Mm,
They were not done openly. They were done
right.
in secret. There were professors and educators and advisors who wanted to make sure that those students were getting the best education and the best access to getting higher education as they could. So they
Mm,
found champions throughout organizations who was down for the cause. And when there's an empty boardroom or an empty classroom meeting, they would go in and they would talk about and build a strategy of how they can start making those changes. And so sometimes it's not bad to go back to the origin story and pick up what you learned.
wow. First of all, thank you for that, because I didn't even realize, one, it started in the university setting until we spoke about it today, and then two, like how, like, I don't know if you call it grassroots, but I guess kind of like just kind of like a word of mouth and kind of like just trying to like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And that's why I said, like, when I look at all the stress that's coming down on Black professionals in higher education and education in general, I was like, I was not surprised by that, because
Mm,
that's where it started.
yeah.
So sometimes you have to even if you don't know the whole history of things, you have to see where the resistance comes from
Right.
and where the impact is hitting.
Mm,
And they went after education before anything else
right.
of DEI with universities, even though we could talk ad nauseum about critical race theory only being taught in higher education, the fear of it struck the education system first before it touched anything else.
Yeah.
And that's because that's where DEI started.
Mm,
Because in higher education, they knew that they had the power to shape minds and make more inclusive communities. And that's where you hear and that's where you started to see that flip in the 60s and 70s of, oh, you're going to liberal college, you're being around all these liberals and college. And that's part of the
right.
rhetoric that spun around it's to the point of the college stuff. Like then you have those who will see it like, oh, it's a liberal thing, and so those who are more conservative minded would kind of identify colleges what you would expect, and that's
Right.
due to the DEI efforts starting very early on campuses.
Mm. So no, I was wondering, like, as it relates to like the components of like educating people around queerness, um, even with, if it relates to DEI work or just queerness in the Black community, because I know that it's still a thing where we are working on trying to understand how to grapple that. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Me being a queer person, it's it's been a thing where I just had to like plow through and be like, look, this is me, right?
Hmm.
I was fortunate to be that type of person and be safe in the spaces that I have been in, but that's not the case for everyone. So like how do we, or how is that, or do you see that like changing, or is it staying the same in everyday society with the work that you do?
I think that that's changing, and I'm
Okay.
glad that you brought that up about, when it comes to Black and queerness. That's another reason why I like working with my Black women and my Black queer women, because y'all have a different nuance of tiredness, because y'all are often asked, and this is queer people in the Black community in general,
Mhm.
to uphold just your race identity before holding up your queerness identity.
Yeah.
And the understanding needs to come when we're talking about liberation, is that, like I said, multiple realities. People are allowed to be more than one thing. You are
Yeah.
allowed to be Black and queer and hold both of those identities with the same regard, because they are both a part of you.
Yeah.
So who am I to, want to have an expectation of my Black brothers and sisters in trans folk to feel like they have to fit themselves in a box for me to feel like they can come along with the
Mm.
liberation journey with me?
Right.
That's not liberation. Like I said, that's supremacy.
Mm.
If I'm only wanting my straight Black brothers and sisters and trans folk to come along on the freedom train with me, and that's it. But I'm like, oh, but I don't know about, the queer folks. Like, then
Right.
no, then I'm being a supremacist, and like that's not my ministry.
Right. You know,
So
and
I
I
would
feel,
say,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
so I was just like, so I will close with this, with the where I'm seeing is that I am seeing a lot more open talk with this philosophy. I don't think anyone's ever really said it this way, but the way I see it is liberation to me in this society means that you're going to have different boxes, right?
Mm.
Different boxes of with labels of, Black, white, queer, disabled, whatever. It is not my job for me to put you in any of these boxes.
Mm.
If you want to put yourselves in any of these boxes that identify you, then you, as your right as a human being, has the right to do that. So it is not about you trying to put other people in boxes and labels to make you feel comfortable or to give you a cheat sheet on how you think you're supposed to treat that person.
Mm.
Liberation is, I'm going to treat you with respect, regardless whether you put yourself in this box or don't, or just throw the box away altogether.
Right. Clarissa, you are amazing. I literally could talk to you all day because seriously, this was just amazing because I feel like in so many ways, and I hope maybe at some point we can come back and we can talk about this even more because I feel like as you were talking about the ideas of supremacy in marginalized groups, I think a lot of people don't even consider that because like, oh, I'm a Black person or I'm whatever, so I can't be supreme. yeah, actually you can promote supremacy in ways that you don't even realize.
Yeah,
So thank you so much for this conversation.
you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. I'll nerd out on all this stuff. I just that don't don't open up that Pandora's box unless you really want to, because I talk your ear off on lots of stuff.
And
But
listen, I am here to listen and take it in because I will nerd out with you. So I'm like, yes, because I love learning stuff too. So I'm like, bring it on for real. But before we go, if you can let everyone know where they can find you, social media, websites, um, and even like with your coaching program, like where people can find that information too. Take it away.
absolutely. So, if you are looking for someone to help you in your organization, um, open up the hood and start finding ways that processes can be more fair and equitable for the whole employee life cycle, from when they're being recruited to when you're moving on to something else, you can find me at Inclusion.Logic. So it's Inclusion.Logic.com. And if you are looking for someone to help you with your life journey, someone can be a companion with you and helping you get unstuck or realize some of your full potential in other areas, even unpacking internalized anti-blackness and misogyny,
Mm,
you can reach out to me at lifecoachchloe.com.
awesome. And I will share this information in the show notes. Oh my gosh, Clarissa, I can't even talk. I'm like, thank you so much again. I'm just like so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh. Thank you so much again for your time and for just sharing with us this evening. This really meant a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to like listen to more of your podcast. And yeah, I'm just really excited to make a connection with you and in all of your audience. I really appreciate the time.
You are so welcome. And y'all, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Eating Me podcast. I'll see y'all next week. Thank you so much.